Hello, everyone. We are back. We are going to be learning about the Vedas today, or at least I will be. I'll be learning about the Vedas today, giving my thoughts and reaction as someone who is not necessarily overly familiar with Hinduism. I know a bit. I've been actually reading a book recently about the basics of Hinduism. So I've been increasingly intrigued, and we'll see what more I can learn. I'm going to try to learn more about the Vedas today, since that's the essential text of Hinduism. But yeah, if you enjoy these type of videos where I react to different religions, where I explore different religions, I try to better understand them, all that good stuff. That ranges from my light's not on. I should turn my light on while I'm thinking about it. Oh boy, pumping the camera. Just give me a hot second here. There we go. Oh, beautiful. Now let me go back and just make sure. Beautiful. Okay, my hair looks great too, man. All right, there we go. Okay, so now, if you enjoy these type of videos where I'm reacting to different religions, reviewing them, trying to better understand them, making videos about it, comparative religion, all that good stuff, definitely subscribe, leave a comment, all that good stuff, And if you want to interact with the live chat during a live stream or something, you have to be a subscriber, so go ahead and do that. But yeah, so today I'm going to be reacting to the brief history of the Vedas. I'll get started here in a minute or two. Maybe give people a chance to hop on. Of course, if you're watching this after the fact, you can always skip ahead a minute or two, and you'll probably be right into the action. But yeah, so the reason why I wanted to react to this video specifically is because some of my Hindu viewers and listeners, subscribers, all that jazz, some of them have requested that I react to some Project Shivoham videos, and I was like, okay, I will give them a look. So that is what's going on today. Giving a look at the Project Shivoham videos that some of my Hindu viewers, or at least I presume to be Hindu viewers, have requested. And I'll see what I can learn today. Because by what I understand is that the Vedas are a very ancient text. And they are, I've heard that they are the oldest, one of the oldest religious texts. I don't know for certain about that fact, but I've heard they're very old. The tradition is very long. There's a lot there, so we'll see what we can learn today. Hello, Hans. Hello. Thank you for the reaction. You are welcome. We're going to get hopped into it here soon. So you are welcome for the reaction, and I hope you enjoy it and stick around. How are you doing today, Hans? All right, so we will get started here, I think now. It's been about a couple minutes or so after 7. I think it'll be good to go. And I'll give you my thoughts. Turn it down by hand. Let me know if the audio is good.
The land of knowledge. That is one of the names of India, and for a very good reason. If we turn the hidden pages of the history, long before the Islamic invasions and the European colonization, India has been one of the very few civilizations which has a very advanced education system of that times. I'm not saying this. If we turn back the pages of the history before 1000 AD, that's before Mughal invasions and the European colonization began, travelers from Europe, Persia to China used to travel to India to obtain the knowledge as part of this Vedic culture. If you read the books written by Megasthenes, Al-Bruni, or Hyun-Sang, you'll get to know how advanced Indian education system at that times was. The knowledge of ancient India. It is one of the most comprehensive and complex education systems in the world. In this short video, we try to compile how the ancient Indian education system looked like. The heritage of the ancient Indian education and value system as we know today has been largely preserved by the inscriptions on the temples, manuscripts, and verbally transmitted.
I didn't realize that they had I didn't realize there was Indian inscriptions on temples. I knew about the manuscripts and the teachings and things. That intrigues me. I didn't know there was inscriptions on temples and stuff like that. That's fascinating.
From a teacher to a student. These are the 3 main sources from which we have been preserving the Vedic education system till today. Now let's see what they are. For ease of understanding, we have put it this way. There are 6 broad categories of Indian scriptures which hold the entire knowledge system. They are Shruti, Smriti, Purana, Itihasam, Agamam, Siddhantam. And they cover a diverse set of fields of education like mathematics, physics, biology, philosophy, astronomy, health sciences, linguistics, and many other branches of science and technology besides the theological concepts. Starting with the first one, Shruti. Shruti is well known as the Vedas, and there are 4 of them. Rig Veda, Yajur Veda, Samaveda, and Atharvana Veda. Rig means...
Let me see. So I think he's going to go through these. So there's 4 main Vedas, which actually makes sense. Where's my Vedas? I think they're right there. Yeah, I have a book of the Vedas as well. I've been parceling through it a little bit, trying to learn more. And I realize without context, there's a lot of it that's kind of confusing. So partially why I'm reading a book on Hinduism, just to better understand it. But this is interesting. So Shruti is like the Vedas. That is that main context. I find it interesting already that he's talking about these 6 categories, which he says is like deals a lot with not just theology, but deals a lot with like biology, science, all these different things. And as far as his like regard about how people used to visit India for its knowledge, I wasn't aware of that necessarily. I think that's interesting. I think the one thing that I've always known about India though is that it's always been somewhat of like a coveted place because, if I don't understand, India has quite a bit of natural resources. It has a lot of it has a lot of resources, a long history, all that stuff. So it doesn't necessarily surprise me. It's just interesting. But let's see what these 4 Vedas are all about. It means praise. Let's see if he explains it.
Praise, a form of expressing the gratitude. It explains about the various hymns praising the elements of nature and cosmos. And the second one is Yajurveda. Yajur means worship. It explains about different procedures of worship of the nature and cosmos. And the third one is Samaveda. Sama means song. It gives a music-driven canonical format to the other Vedas for ease of recitation. The fourth one is Adharvana Veda. Adharva means stable mind. It sets the rules for a steady state daily life activities that needs to be observed in a Vedic culture. All these 4 Vedas are not just like any other 4 ordinary books. You will not understand a word of it unless you are blessed with a guru who can explain to you what each of these mean. And they are...
That is interesting. So you actually need to be blessed with a guru to understand what they mean. Let me continue on before I finish.
Highly interconnected with each other. Further down, if we look into any of these 4 ordinary books, you will not understand a word of it unless you are blessed with a guru who can explain to you what each of these mean. And they are highly interconnected with each other. Further down, if we look in...
Now, okay. So you don't understand them. It's a special book. You don't understand without a guru to explain it to you. How does one become a guru? 1. 2. How does one know that they are a guru? 3. Is that the case only because the spiritual knowledge is only revealed to you via some sort of spiritual transmission? I find that interesting just because, like, I guess I'm trying to put myself into the shoes of how does one become a guru? How does one understand it? I kind of would like to know that process to a certain extent. So anyway, because that shows me there's some sort of leadership structure here as far as the spiritual knowledge and wisdom goes within the constructs of Hinduism. But we'll see. Let's keep going.
Into any of these 4 Vedas, it has 4 fundamental blocks. Aranyaka, Brahmana, Samhita, Upanishad, supported by 6 external blocks. Siksha, Vyakarana, Chandas, Nirukta, Jyotisha and Kalpa. We'll keep it very simple, not going into further details. The 4 internal blocks of Aranyaka, Brahmana, Samhita and Upanishads, they describe the theosophical, philosophical and physiological anatomy of the cosmos and the nature and the fundamentals of human existence. In simple words, it describes Brahman, which means the ultimate and the supreme power of the existence. The 6 external blocks, Siksha, Vyakarana, Chandas, Nirukta, Jyotisha and Kalpa, these are called as Vedangas. They complement the knowledge framework of Vedas with different and intricate specializations each. As you see here, Siksha is study of phonetics, Vyakarana is study of grammar, Chandas is study of linguistic rhythm and prosody, Nirukta is study of etymology, Jyotisha is study of astronomy, and Kalpa is study of rituals. All these 6 are called as Vedangas. And that's how the 4 Vedas are supported by the 6 Vedangas. And that is not all. Each of the 4 Vedas have 4 Upavedas as an offspring. Ayurveda, the study of life sciences, ascribing to Rig Veda. Gandharva Veda, study of music, art and dance, ascribing to Samaveda. Dhanurveda, study of archery and warfare, ascribing to Yajurveda. And Ardhashastra, study of business administration and political sciences.
Learning all of this is starting to help me better understand also the structures of Hinduism to a certain extent. Meaning, Hinduism has a very extensive integration with politics and religion, with the caste system, with how they operate business. Even everyday things are considered rituals. By what I understand, like marriage is like a ritual. You know, what your occupation is to a certain extent is involved with your class, your caste, and like your rituals and things. Like life basically is its religious fabric to a certain extent, which makes sense again because by what I understand, like Brahman is like the spirit of almost everything. Um, but okay, I find that interesting because this explains like medicine, music, archery, warfare, business. It's all kind of wrapped up in the Vedas here. It seems.
Ascribing to Atharvana Veda. Now, this is the complete picture of what we call today, in simple words, as Vedas. And one of our prime objectives of this channel, Project Shivoham, is to bring forward this entire knowledge system in a simple format that everybody can understand. We already did a couple of documentaries on Dhanurvedam, Ayurvedam, Sanskrit, and a lot more. And you can find them on our channel. And the next one is Smriti. Smriti is authored by the sages and saints who mastered Shruti, which is the Vedas, and brought in their experiences and revelations. It is much like a thesis that the sages on different branches of studies like theology, philosophy, science, etc. It completely subserves or ascribes to Shruti, which is the final authority. And there are 18 such Smritis written by different rishis. And they are Atri, Vishnu, Harita, Aushanasi, Angirasa, Yama, Apastambha, Samavarta, Katyayana, Brihaspati, Parashara, Vyasa, Shankha, Likita, Daksha, Gautama, Shatatapa, and Vasishtha Smriti. And the next one is Puranam. In very simple words, Puranam is nothing but a historical document. Often Puranam is mistaken as a mythology, but the fact of the matter is it's a historical document that has a 10-dimensional feature. And the 10 are, the first one is Sarga, history of creation of cosmos. Second one is Visarga, history of creation of the worlds. Third, Vrupti, history of evolution of the life. Fourth, Raksha, history of sustenance of life. Fifth, Amtarani, history of the time scale and how the time used to be measured in the past. Sixth, Vamsha. Seventh, Vamshanusharita. Both explain about the history of the lineage and the history of the dynasties that ruled Bharat since times immemorial. Eighth, Samstha, history of the catastrophes, all the natural calamities that have occurred in the past. Ninth, Hetu, history of the prime causes of those catastrophes. And the last one is Apasarayaha, history of the Supreme Being or the different incarnations of God. And there are 18 such Puranas, all written by just one Rishi, Sri Vedavyasa. And the 18 are Markandeya Purana, Matsya Purana, Bhagavata, Bhavishya, Brahmanda, Brahma, Brahmavaivarta, Vishnu, Varaha, Vamana, Vayu, Agni, Narada, Padma, Linga, Garuda, Kurma, and Skanda Puranas. The amount of knowledge in these Puranas is just incredible. For instance, Agni Puranam explains about different varieties of martial arts. We did a short documentary on Dhanurvedam, extracting details from Agni Puranam and Dhanurveda Samhita. You can check out on our channel.
This is very... What makes this very interesting to me is there is an extensive list of literature here. A large, extensive list of literature. And now I can better understand the reason why a Hindu or anyone at least studying Hinduism could spend probably their entire life trying to learn the ins and outs of this faith. And I think also this explains to me why Hinduism is so diverse in its beliefs. Meaning, like, there are tons of Hindus out there, by what I understand, about 1 billion or so. And the extent to the amount of diversity within the Hindu community is pretty vast. And there's like multiple ways that people think you can, reach moksha. And there's a lot of different divergent opinions on which path to take, which is best. A lot of different approaches, very philosophical, very like practical, all these things. And this makes sense because no one really has probably the time or the ability to fully invest to read all of this stuff, like every single piece of it. And even if you could, theoretically, even if someone did spend their whole life reading all this stuff, you're bound to forget things. You're bound to like get mind boggled to a certain extent. you would spend pretty much your whole life trying to understand this. So that's pretty crazy, just how much literature there is. Hello, welcome to the chat.
The next one in line is Itihasa. Itihasa, the word spells as Itihasa, which means this is how it happened. Of all the scriptures, Itihasas are the one which shaped up the ethos of India as we know today. And there are only two Itihasas, Sri Ramayanam and Mahabharatam. These two scriptures are of the highest order, which defined, directed and drive the human values in India since thousands of years. And Bhagavad Gita, which is the epitome of all the sacred scriptures, is an integral part of the grand epic of Mahabharatam.
Interesting.
And the next one
Now,
is...
by also, if anyone understands in the chat, they can let me know. But by what I can best understand, the history of Hinduism would also include, to a certain extent, the cyclical time and multiple universes and all these different things. So, like, some of these histories / stories from the past and all that, according to Hinduism, of course, would also be including the other, like, maybe other universes or universes from the past, cyclical time and things that, like, they may not necessarily be stories that have taken place in our Earth or in our time, but they may have taken place in universes past. I mean, I could be corrected, but I understand that is kind of an understanding. And it sounds like what he just read there, these two, it sounds like they are very important to how current day Hindus, where they extract a lot of values from. But again, by what I understand, I think this is the epic that's like extremely long. I could be wrong about that, but I know one of the epics that's really big in Hinduism is extremely long, like longer than the Bible, like incredibly long. But basically, it seems like these is where like an integral part of where they draw their ethics from for humanity. So if I can understand this properly, the Vedas seem to be more about worship. And they seem to delve into everyday aspects of life, but they seem primarily to be about worship. But then you have the histories, and then you have sort of the value system being derived here. Okay, I'm trying to place everything, sort of understand it to a certain extent.
Scriptures is an integral part of the grand epic of Mahabharata. And the next one is Agamas. Agamas are treatises on theology, epistemology, and also describes the architectural principles of temple construction. Basically, they are the rule books of how a temple needs to be constructed and the rituals in the temple needs to be organized. All the magnificent grandeur of the Indian temples and the exquisite carvings that we have on the Indian temples.
That's one thing I will also say. The one thing about Hinduism that's crazy to me is their temples. Like, just the intricacy of these temples, it's crazy, like how much artwork goes into these buildings. I would love to visit India just to see these temples in person, because I think some of these temples are just really crazy to look at. The artwork is just phenomenal. Even if I don't necessarily agree with all the beliefs and everything, or don't necessarily align with everything, I think it would just be interesting to see them in person. And again, since I do comparative religion, I'm just intrigued by religion in general. So I think it would be very interesting just to visit India and to see these places in person, like actually like witness them. I think that would be fascinating. Different traditions will base their teachings on a certain selection of scriptures. Nobody can learn all the texts. You are correct. That is okay. So they sort of pick the scriptures that, I'm assuming they pick the scriptures that mean the most to them, or they pick the scriptures that make the most sense to them. Perhaps maybe what caste they're in, or what sector of the world they're in, or where they grew up, that might influence what scriptures they focus on. Okay, that's interesting. That is interesting how people will select the scriptures that they want, because like from a lot of religious backgrounds, it's not just a picking and choosing. A lot of religious backgrounds, let's just take Islam and Christianity for instance, a lot of times they're like you need to be familiar at least with the core text. Like Islam, you have to be familiar with the Quran. Christianity, be familiar with the Bible. But it seems like in the case of Hinduism, it's much more selective, which I find that very, very fascinating. How does one know what scriptures are best for them? And I assume again it's based on what resonates with them the most, or what they're most familiar with. Yes, Mahabharata is the longest epic in the world. Very long. I remember one time looking into it. because I was looking at like different religious texts, and I came across this epic, and I was like, it's like, I forget, I think it's like 3 times the size of the Bible or something crazy, and I was like, that's just one epic. My word, did one person write that, or did multiple people write that? I don't know, but I was just like, that's crazy long epic. I was half tempted to try to read it myself, but I saw how long it was. I'm like, I might just get the overview and just spark notes real fast. But that's crazy. That is crazy.
Source code of all that beauty is from Agamas. For instance, Shilpa Shastra, the branch of knowledge which deals with sculpting, is from Agamas. And there are 77 Shakti Agamas, 28 Shiva Agamas, and 108 Vishnu Agamas. So wide and so deep. The last one we have Siddhantam. Siddhantam means principles, a set of principles in different fields of science and technology. These are the most interesting part of the scriptures. For instance, in astronomy itself we have 18 Siddhantas which talks about different details about planetary motions, geometrical principles, trigonometry, calculus, a lot more. In this category, we have a huge set of scriptures that are in the fields of science and technology. To name a few, Sushruta Samhita by Rishi Sushruta on surgery and medicine, Aryabhattiyam by Aryabhatta on astrophysics and astronomy, Ardhashastra by Chanakya on commerce and business administration, Panchasiddhanta by Varahamihira on treatise of astronomy, Rasendra Mangalam by Nagarjuna on the science of alchemy, and the list goes on and on.
It's very interesting to me. Because I think in general people underestimate how smart and knowledgeable people were from the past. Because I look at this list and a lot of these topics seem like way too advanced topics for people from the past. But I'm sure if you do read them that they do, at least to a certain extent. To what extent, I'm not sure. To what certain extent, they'll probably do delve into some of these topics pretty in depth at least for their time. I really have to think that people from ancient times past were much smarter than we give them credit for, and we're much brighter than we think they were. I have to imagine again, like that just because if you look at Greek culture, a lot of the Greek philosophers were very brilliant. Like one of the Greek philosophers was able to estimate the diameter, the surface area or the diameter, I forget which one, of the Earth just using a stick. Basically just using a stick and then walking the length to a city. And then he, based on those two things, was able to estimate the diameter of the entire Earth within like 0.01% or 1% differential or something. Like stuff like that. Like, and then you look at even some of the medicine that came out of what parts of the world was that? I forget where. But there's certain things, there's certain areas where it's just like I think ancient people were much brighter than we give them credit for. And we lose a lot to history, so we don't necessarily know always. But this is interesting to me. It would be very interesting for me to delve into this and actually see to what extent they delved into these topics. Like atomic theory. Like that one, for instance, strikes me as fun. Very interesting. I know I forget which Greek philosopher it was, but one of the Greek philosophers actually theorized the existence of atoms. Namely, he theorized that matter is made up of small balls of matter. That was about the extent he got to. But I would be interested to see to what extent these were delved into.
By Nagarjuna on the science of alchemy, and the list goes on and on. And that is a very brief history about the Vedas and the other scriptures of ancient Indian education system. For ease of understanding, we tried to condense a lot, but it is so wide, deep, and complex all at the same time. And the backbone for this entire education system is Sanskritam. And if we don't have the competence of Sanskritam, all this knowledge system is good for nothing. Let me give you one example and you will understand it. Here is a slokam from Aryabhattiya, written by Aryabhatta. Yes, the same man whom we celebrate that he invented zero. In this slokam, he gave two scenarios. The first scenario is two bodies moving in opposite directions, and the second scenario is two bodies moving in same direction. He says that time elapsed for R and B to pass through or otherwise is equal to the distance by sum of their speeds. And in the other scenario, it is distance by difference of the speeds. In simple words, he gave the equation of speed is equal to distance by time. This equation of speed is equal to distance by time is the foundation for kinematics, a branch of physics, which is the heart and soul of everything that moves in this world. This equation is the foundation in the engineering of be it a car or a space shuttle. This equation is a revolutionary discovery. But if we don't know how to read Sanskritam, all this is good for nothing. According to the documented history, Galileo Galilei, in the year 1638, he published a book called Two New Sciences. In this book, he first gave the formula of speed is equal to distance by time. Now, don't start judging Galileo. All his work is original, and if you read this book, you'll get to know. He did not get inspired from Aryabhatta. But the fact of the matter is, something that was discovered by Aryabhatta in 510 CE had to be rediscovered by Galileo in the year 1638. In these 1000 years, the speed is equal to distance by time equation, which is written in Sanskritam, is locked up in Aryabhatiya. 1000 years. Imagine what could have been the impact if this was known earlier to the whole world. All we know about Aryabhatta is he invented zero, but he has left us a wealth of information. Well, how many such equations and other scientific concepts are hidden in the Indian scriptures, which are written in Sanskritam, waiting to be decoded? Well, I'm not saying that all the great things in this world were invented or discovered by Indians, but all the great things that were done by Indians are not known to the world. And that's why we started Project Shivoham, to bring forward all these kinds of stories. And as always, thanks for watching.
Interesting. I was really curious if he was going to try to bash Galileo there at the end. I do appreciate how he did approach that, because it is always important to know that people can discover things at different times and never know about each other. So, like, for instance, someone in Europe could discover a mathematical phenomenon that someone in India discovered hundreds of years before them, but they never met each other. Their research never overlapped. They just independently both discovered these things at different times. Yeah, it's possible. Actually, it's happened tons of times throughout history. I mean, architecture, like every civilization had buildings at some point. They all discovered at some point how to make buildings. And a lot of them didn't interact with each other. So it's always important to know that people can discover things at different times. That is interesting, though, that, like, if this is true, again, I'm taking this at face value. I have no reason to doubt it, no reason to necessarily trust it either. I would have to look into it myself to know for sure. But I do find it interesting, like, considering this all to be true, that these mathematical equations would have been discovered by these ancient philosophers, which doesn't shock me. Again, if you spend a lot of time thinking and you have very bright people in your group, you're going to discover some crazy things. Look at the temples and you'll see how clever they were. They were able to do things with granite like it is wood. Yeah, I mean, I forget which ones I've seen in the past. I've seen, like, not in person, on camera. The one that sticks out to my mind is, like, the very colorful one, with all the different gods, I think, on the side of it. Like, it's like a cone, almost like, not cone shape, like a... It all goes to the top. I'm trying to think when... Not cone. Like a pyramid. Yeah, it's like a pyramid at the top with, like, all these different little painted gods on it, I think. That one always intrigued me. There's another one that intrigues me. I forget. Is that the Hindu temple or is that a Buddhist temple? No, I don't know. It's like a white one, of like an all-white one. I forget if that's Hindu or Buddhist. I read the famous Hindu book, the Panjajal. Oh, interesting. I mean, I didn't even know what that is. But again, I'm kind of a newbie to all this stuff. I'm kind of learning about Hinduism. I'm more familiar with like Christianity. Well, I'm a Christian, so I'm familiar with that. But I'm also more familiar with like Islam and Judaism and stuff, the other monotheistic religions. I'm growing my familiarity with Hinduism. Again, I'm trying to learn it a little bit more, studying it a little bit. And you know, it's just there's a lot of stuff to learn about every religion. There's a lot of stuff to learn. There's a lot of stuff to learn about everything. So I think that's interesting. I had another one, like, what are the Vedas? But although I'm kind of curious now. I want to look at the temples real fast. Yes, Hindu temples. Let me see here real fast if I can pull up any images. This was what I was referring to. That one right there. That one always intrigued me. I don't know what it's called, but this is the one that has always intrigued me because I'm just like, how old is it? I think, by what I understand, it's fairly old. And it's just like articulate. Yeah, here it is. Here's the one too. Like, these are just interesting to me, how intricate they are and how colorful they are. I don't know, they just fascinate me like no tomorrow. I think this is the one though. No, I don't know if this. No, actually, I think this is the white one I was referring to. That's interesting. The Lotus Tour. Yeah, I've seen this one before. That one's pretty cool. I'm not sure about that one. I don't know if I've ever seen that one, but although it's pretty interesting. Oh yeah, this one This one I've seen as well. Again, it's just massive structures. And to think that like not even just Hindu culture, but like all these like a lot of these ancient cultures who have built like I mean, for instance, in medieval times, you have giant chapels and stuff like that, churches, or you have giant in China, you know, the Great Wall of China, everything. Like some of these old ancient architectural wonders, not possessing like you know cranes and all the modern technology we have today, and being able to build these intricate buildings and giant buildings, still blows my mind to this day. And a lot of times they were done for the purpose of either you know politics, like big government, big city, or for the purpose of religion. So anyway, I think that's interesting. Have you heard about Kalasha Temple carved out of single rock? No, actually, I'm curious. Does it still exist to this day, or did it get destroyed? Kailasha Temple? Oh, that's interesting. That is fascinating. Wow. Is that a rock or a mountainside? I guess it's a rock. Well, it's in on a mountain, it looks like. Wow, that's fascinating. Huh. Is that in India? Is that in India? That's pretty crazy. Again, I want to visit India sometime just to see the landscape because I think it would be pretty cool. That how much time was spent trying to build this thing? That's crazy. Mountain to be more precise. I was gonna say that does not look like a rock to me, friend. That looks like a mountain. Yes, that's South India in style. Amity Temple. I probably butchered all that word, but compare Sikh temple architecture. Sikh temple architecture. What makes Sikh temple? I don't know. Let's see. Ooh. Wow. Temples intrigue me, man. Temples intrigue me. Religious buildings in general intrigue me because they're so intricate and beautiful a lot of the time. They're just so amazing. Like, oh my word. Anyway, I'm getting carried away. I'm getting carried away by beautiful buildings and natural phenomenons. Dubai built a Hindu temple, and it's the first time since pre-Islamic era. Wait, Dubai built a Hindu temple, and it's the first time since Wait, Dubai just recently built Hindu? Wait, Dubai just built Hindu temple? Oh. Huh. Interesting. Okay. I don't know. Is Dubai? I don't know how religiously free Dubai is. Is it very religiously free? I don't know. I really don't. I don't know much about Dubai politics, to be honest with you. But that's interesting. Carved out from the top, yes, in India near LA Caves. 100 years min. 100 years to build a temple. Crazy. Crazy. All right. I'm getting a bit distracted by temples. Let's learn more about the Vedas. What are the Vedas? I don't know if I'll be able to finish this one before 8 o'clock. Oh, no, we'll see. We'll see how far I go. We'll see.
Different lists of the biggest religions in the world. Hinduism is often somewhere at the top of that list. It is often ranked as the third or fourth largest religion in the world with an enormous...
Okay. What's funny to me... I shouldn't say funny, but what's interesting to me is that Hinduism is like the third largest religion in the world. But Hinduism also has probably the largest concentration of its believers in like one area. So like for instance, you take something like a religion like Christianity. It's spread. There's a lot of Christians across the entire world. Its entire population is spread out pretty wide. It's a pretty wide spread out. Islam spread out across multiple countries. There's a pretty high concentration of Islam within like certain areas of like Asia and Middle East, but like still it's spread out a decent amount. And I'm not sure about Buddhism and stuff, but like Hinduism is pretty well concentrated in one area. I just find that interesting.
Following of over 1 billion people. In this series of videos, I want to explore the vast religion of Hinduism, as well as other religions with origins in the Indian subcontinent, which are often known as the Dharmic religions. But I will have a bit of a different approach to this. I will not be asking questions like, what is Hinduism, as that will be plagued with a lot of problems. What we call Hinduism is such a vast and broad term that it's questionable if it can even be called a religion at all. It should really properly be seen as an umbrella term for a vast amount of different religious traditions from India, which can sometimes be drastically different from each other. Now, much of this can, of course, be said about other religions too. Christianity is also an umbrella term of sorts for a vast amount of different traditions, as is Islam. But when it comes to Hinduism, this is true to an unusual degree. Some even want to say that Hinduism is actually many different religions altogether that is only artificially sort of unified into a single whole. And while this may be a question of semantics, I generally don't like to go this far. Sure, Hinduism is a very slippery term that denotes many different, sometimes very loosely connected religious traditions in India, but they all have certain characteristics or core features that unify them and which also separates them from other religions in the region like Buddhism or Jainism. And the primary unifying characteristic of this vast category called Hinduism, what ties it all together, you could say, is its basis in and relationship to the scriptures known as the Vedas. So in this series, I will not be asking questions like, what is Hinduism, as I said, but instead I will be focusing on specific subjects, particular subjects that will serve as representations of this vast religion. So that includes the different scriptures, different great theologians and philosophers, as well as how Hinduism functions as a living religion both historically and today. And what better place to start than with the foundational and most important sacred scriptures in Hinduism, the Vedas. Now, Hinduism is sometimes called the oldest still existing religion in the world. And this is somewhat of an oversimplification, since many of the core features that we recognize as Hinduism appears quite late in history, in a few centuries into the...
That is, okay. I find this interesting. One, I'm curious if anyone actually, if my Hindu friends, if they consider Hinduism a religion or not. Because I find that interesting. I've heard that before for like Buddhism. I've heard Buddhism is not really, some people say it's not really a religion, it's more of a philosophy. I'm curious if you think Hinduism is more of a religion or a philosophy, or just a general category. You could say the same about Shinto in Japan. 8% of Japanese gods are actually Hindu gods. I mean, yes, I mean, by what I understand, Shinto originated in Japan, so that doesn't surprise me. Also, if I understand correctly, Shinto isolate themselves quite a bit. I'm not sure, though, for 100%. 80% of Japanese gods are actually Hindu gods. And what about the twins? You guys figure that out. You figure out the math. I'm going to keep watching this video.
The Common Era. But at the same time, some of the foundations of what we call Hinduism date back very far back in history. Indeed, the earliest Veda scriptures are some of the oldest surviving religious literature in all of history. While they weren't written down until much later, it is said that the earliest parts of the Vedas were written sometime around 1500 BCE. The Vedas are considered revealed scripture, called Shruti in Sanskrit. In other words, they were not written by human hands, but revealed directly by the gods to the ancient sages who then memorized them. These sages and quote-unquote authors of the Vedas are called rishis, and the revelations that these rishis received are all in the language called Sanskrit, which is a language that belongs to the larger Indo-Iranian and Indo-European language group. The origins of this culture and its textual tradition is somewhat shrouded in mystery, and there are many different theories. Generally, it is thought that the Vedic culture, as it has become known, immigrated into this Indian subcontinent during the 2nd millennium BCE from the west, and is part of the ethnic group known as the Aryans. It was thus not native to India, but came from further west and shares cultural and religious origins with the people of what is today.
First of all, I find it interesting that I didn't know that the original texts were believed to be revealed by like gods themselves, not by just like human authors. I find that interesting. I did know that it didn't originate in India, but ended up traveling to India at some point. I'm sure you'll get into that. I think what's also fascinating to me is whenever you get to a point where it's like this old, like same thing happens with the Old Testament too. Old Testament runs into a similar dilemma where the history starts becoming very vague. The farther in the past you go, the farther into history you go, the harder and harder it gets to establish a strong historical narrative. It starts becoming more vague. There's less historical knowledge, less information, and it makes sense because you're going farther back in time. So I'm not surprised that the very early history of Hinduism is shrouded in mystery.
Iran and the greater Persian region. Although this can be quite a controversial subject for some, and as I said, much of this is quite uncertain still. What is clear is that the earliest Veda text appeared in a religious context in northern India, accompanied with certain ritual traditions that involved ritual sacrifice. Now, the Vedas can be quite complicated in their structure and different parts, but generally they are divided into 4 categories: the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Athar Veda. The earliest of these is the Rig Veda, composed as early as around 1500 BCE. The others were written during the following centuries, being composed somewhere between 1200 to 800 BCE. The Vedas were originally oral traditions and were not written down until later. So if we take the oldest, for example, the Rig Veda, the hymns and mantras that it contains were orally transmitted between masters and students with minute detail, both the words and sounds, but also specific melodies and pronunciations. This tradition even continues to this day, so that when you listen to priests reciting the Vedas today, you are listening to the exact way that they would have sounded thousands of years ago. To quote Michael Witzel, it's, quote, something like a tape recording of circa 1500 to 500 BCE. The main part of these 4 Veda collections consists of hymns to the gods and mantras to be recited while performing the ritual sacrifice. The Vedic culture and religion that had emerged at this time was a highly ritualized religion in which a class of priests called the Brahmins would perform various rites. One of the central rituals, and one that is mentioned a lot in the Vedas, is the Soma ritual. Now, Soma was a drink that was consumed, and so naturally a lot of speculation has gone into figuring out what this...
I'm sorry. If anyone's familiar with the book Brave New World, Soma takes on a very interesting connotation and a very different look on the idea of Soma. So anyway, my whole understanding of Soma comes from the Brave New World book by Aldous Huxley. Traditionally, Vedas are considered as timeless. That doesn't surprise me. It doesn't surprise me because a lot of religious traditions typically think of their books as either like for instance in the case of Islam, traditionally Islam believes that the Quran is the eternal word of God and it was revealed to Muhammad at, I forget what, 600 CE, something like that. Even within like Christianity, it would be believed that God revealed himself at the very earliest times of history. It wasn't just things weren't starting to be written down until Moses' time. But yeah, that doesn't surprise me. Soma is the name of the nucleus inside a neuron. That's a random fun fact I didn't know. Thank you. Every day I'm learning something new on this channel. You know, people come to this channel, I think, to learn, and then I feel like I come onto this live streams and on this channel to learn myself. So it's a mutual back and forth. You know, just keep feeding off each other. Soma is the name of a nucleus inside a neuron. That's interesting. Oh yes, Sacramento today. By the way, I have started uploading to Rumble. I know you mentioned that. I did start uploading to Rumble again. I'm just posting some of my old content right now, seeing how it does. It's not doing great. Sacramento today. Rumble is just not. There's not a lot of people on Rumble, it doesn't seem. There's some people who are doing well on it, but not a lot. But I did start uploading videos to Rumble. I don't know if you'll be able to find my channel or not. Maybe I'll have to link it somewhere. Go Rumble. But I did start uploading to Rumble. I'm just uploading old content right now. Maybe I'll start uploading my new content there eventually. But we'll see. It's like an archive right now, though. Anyway, distraction. Let's get back into it.
drink actually was and or consisted of. We don't actually know for sure. Naturally, of course, many people have speculated that it may have contained certain psychedelic compounds, and that maybe the rishis who composed the Vedas did so under the influence of this soma drink. Another very important ritual at this time was the Shrauta, which involved a ritual fire. In this ritual, the priests would offer different objects like food and drink to the gods by throwing them into the fire while reciting certain mantras and prayers. This fire throwing, this fire sacrifice or fire offering, was the main ritual in all of the early Vedic religion and was central to the worldview and the order of the universe for the Vedic people generally. The ritual sacrifice and the offerings functioned as a kind of exchange. The gods were given gifts, and in return, human beings received blessings of different sorts, and this exchange between the human and divine world is what kept the universe, society, and nature in its proper order. So all of these Vedas are deeply interconnected with the ritual practices of the Brahmin religion. They are the contents of and, you could say, guidebooks for how to perform these Vedic rites. And the hymns that these Vedas contain give us some loose idea of what the theology of the time looked like. There are certain gods that are especially prominent, like Agni, the god of fire, and Indra, among many others, but the specifics of how these gods functioned is a difficult question to answer. There are clearly many different gods mentioned in the Vedas, which indicates a polytheistic religion, but we also find statements like the following in the Rig Veda, quote, "God is one, men call him by various names," which seems to indicate a theology where there is one God in reality and the other gods mentioned are only different names or aspects of this God. And this does seem to predict certain later developments in Hinduism. Some deities in the hymn seem to be personifications of things like natural phenomena, but not all of them are. Some of the gods probably were old kings or human beings that were deified after death, which was a very common practice for ancient polytheistic religions. But we're going to make things even more complicated. So these four Vedas, the Rig Veda, the Sama Veda, the Yajur Veda, and the Athar Veda, are also divided into different sections. So number one is the Samhitas, which this is the part that we discussed so far. This is the oldest and main part of the Vedas, the hymns and mantras to the gods. This is what we've been talking about. Sometimes when we talk about the Vedas in a more narrow sense, it is simply only referring to the Samhitas. So this is really the central, the main part of the Vedic corpus. But usually when we say the Vedas, we're talking about a larger collection of texts than...
So do people within Hinduism, like, do they read these texts on their own free time? Or do you have to go to like a guru every time you want to listen to the Vedas or something? Like, do you always have to be in the presence of a guru when wanting to read or listen to the Vedas? Or can you read them on your own? Like, for instance, as a Christian, I read the Bible on my own. But I will, go to a pastor or go to a theologian or something if I have questions and I want some deeper responses to my questions. It's coming from someone more academic than me. But I am still encouraged to read it on my own. Are Hindus typically reading the Vedas, reading Upanishads and these different Hindu texts on their own free time, or do they need gurus and need teachers pretty much most of the time to understand these things or to be read these things? I'm just curious. I don't know for sure. It's like investing in stock early. You'll be rich when the stock starts catching on. It's like investing. You're talking about Rumble still, aren't you? If you start posting on Rumble now, then when Rumble catches on, you'll be on the first channels and your channel will blow up. Yeah, I hope so. I hope Rumble catches on. It could also crash and burn. Rumble could just go into oblivion and not be relevant in the next 2 years. It could get stomped on. Who knows? But yeah, it's always a risk and it's always investing. So let's hope. This is to hoping. It's for the Brahmin to interpret the Vedas. That's the gist I got so far. That's like, for the Brahmins to interpret the Vedas, for the guru to help explain the Vedas, things like that. But I just didn't know if the typical Hindu does not read the Vedas. When they read a text, it is the Bhagavad Gita or Puranas. Okay. if a Hindu's going to read them on their own, those are the ones they would go to quicker. So the one, if I remember correctly, the Puranas are the ones that deal mostly with history, and the Bhagavad Gita, if I'm not mistaken, also deals with history? Question mark. So the historical ones seem to be a little bit more quicker to read. Interesting. Anyway.
Simply these samhitas, and this includes these other categories, which includes number 2, the brahmanas, which are commentaries that try to explain and contextualize the deeper meanings of the Vedic rituals. There is the aranyakas, which discuss the ritual sacrifice and its deeper meanings as well. And lastly, there are the Upanishads, which is quite different from the rest. The Upanishads are philosophical texts that discuss various aspects of life and death, the soul, meditation, and much, much else.
Sounds
so
like
they have a very significant and important role in the later development of what we recognize as Hinduism today. Whereas the other parts of the Vedas are usually only really interested in the rituals, the Vedic rituals and their meaning, the Upanishads are highly speculative, philosophical, and they introduce many new concepts and ideas that are not present, or doesn't seem to be present at least, in the other parts of the Vedas. The Upanishads are also sometimes referred to as Vedanta, which literally means the end of the Vedas, because it is literally the end of the Vedas, both in the sense of being the last part of the Vedas that was written, but also functions as the last section of the Vedas. Written sometime in the middle of the first millennium BCE, the Upanishads continue the, speculation and tradition of the Brahmana texts by trying to find the deeper meanings of the Vedic rituals. But it probably also has origins outside of this ritual culture. Primarily in the northeastern part of India, there had appeared what is known as the Shramana movement. There is some disagreement on whether this was a part of the Vedic religion that grew out of this already existing Vedic tradition, or if it was an independent movement altogether. In any case, the Shramana movement was characterized by individuals living ascetic lives, trying to find enlightenment or liberation through turning inward. So instead of the Vedic focus on external ritual and the centrality of the sacrifice for upholding the universe, the Shramana ascetics looked within themselves to find the answers. And indeed, it seems like it was with the Shramana movement that some of the more characteristic aspects of the Dharmic religions originated. Ideas like karma and samsara, there's ideas about reincarnation, and that our actions, not just the ritual sacrifice, but all our actions, determine the nature of that reincarnation. There is also, among these Shramana mystics, there was the idea of moksha, or liberation, the idea that the goal of life should be to end this cycle of rebirths and to be liberated from them altogether. And this does not seem to have been present as an idea in the earlier Vedic religion. For those scholars who argue that the Shramana movement was something separated from the Vedic religion originally, they argue that it was as a result of the meeting of the Vedic ritualized religion and the Shramana movement that produced the Upanishads, this kind of synthesis between these two religious traditions.
That's interesting.
The Upanishads, in fact, seem to take ideas and concepts and themes from the earlier Veda scriptures and give them a new philosophical meaning inspired by the ideas of the Shramana movement. But others interpret them not as new meanings, but simply as deeper meanings or understandings of the already existing Vedic concepts. So there's a bit of disagreement here as well. For example, the concept of Brahman, which had previously signified the power of the ritual sacrifice and its ability to uphold the world, became a central theme in the Upanishads and was extended even further to mean the very foundation and ground of existence and the universe. Everything comes from the Brahman, everything returns to...
I mean, within most religions, I think this guy is more of a secular historian, so I think he looks at things from a secular historian lens. But most religions, there is this development over time. Like, you start with the oldest text, which is like the core principles, and then from those principles, they start building upon them. And like, so the Bible is written over from the time of Abraham to the time of the early church. So you have like 1,000 and 400 years. I forget how long. 1,500 years, 2,000 years. I'm not sure. Over you have a course of a long time, several hundred to a few thousand years of revelation and things building upon each other. Within Hinduism here, it seems like, again, you have the same thing. Over hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, you have philosophies and texts building upon themselves, at least that we're aware of. And then even within Buddhism, you have Buddhist teachings and things that were revealed over time. Even Muhammad within Islam, his teachings were revealed over 23 years. And then even after that, you have the Hadith tradition from his followers, and then you have commentaries from other people. So it is almost every religion, the text evolves with time and it grows with time as people delve deeper, as they think about it greater, as God reveals himself. All that stuff plays into how these texts play out. Again, it depends on what your belief system is and your biases and things that will influence what you think cause these texts to exist. But that aside, it is always interesting to note that religions do evolve with time to a certain extent, as far as revelation goes. Gita alone is enough to study for a lifetime. It's a dialogue between Krishna and Arjuna and summarizes the philosophical Upanishads in 18 chapters. That sounds like a lot. Philosophy in general is a lot. If you want to study any philosophy in depth, you're going to spend your whole life trying to study it. Tons of my books on my shelf are philosophy books. And I've read philosophy books by Christians, by atheists, by, I've read a few Muslim scholars. I'm reading through a Muslim book right now about the life of Muhammad, written by a Muslim, by what I understand. I'm reading a book on Hinduism, stuff like all these philosophies. If you want to study any philosophy, it's going to be years, your whole lifetime to understand it. But Hinduism seems like you have tons of text to work with, so it does take a while. Yes, it evolves over time through philosophical discussions. That's a very famous case of this is Jewish rabbinical tradition does the same thing, where Jewish rabbinical tradition is all debating. Jews love debates. And I don't mean that to be in really any any bad way or anything. Legitimately, rabbinical teaching, the Talmud and things, are just full of debates. That's the core of a lot of Jewish teaching. As they develop new philosophies and develop new thinkings and stuff, things just build upon each other. That's a very common thing within religion. Hindu and Buddhist discourses over a span of 1,000 years. Does God evolve? As a Christian, I would say he doesn't evolve in the sense that his nature never changes. I would say, to what extent does he reveal himself? He reveals himself over time. So God himself, I wouldn't say evolves, but how much he reveals of himself does change for time periods and time frames. Abraham, to the extent of what Abraham knew about God, I would say was a lot less, or at least not the same as the disciples later, although God himself did not change. Now, again, I'm not going to say within other religions this isn't the case. So, I know in certain religious sectors, they would probably say that God or the gods can evolve or change with time. So, I'm not sure about other religions. I know within a Christian context, I would say that God doesn't change, but the extent of which he reveals himself affects how people perceive him, if that makes sense. I'm not sure if that makes sense. In this aspect, Hinduism is like a Judaism. Interesting. Okay, interesting.
The Brahman, and according to some interpretation, everything is the Brahman. Another very important theme that appears in the Upanishads is the idea of the Atman, or the transcendent self, which seems in some way to be connected to, part of, or even identical with the Brahman. Now, many different traditions and interpretations of these Upanishads appeared over the coming centuries, which have together often come to be known as Vedanta. And this can look very different. So, for example, the scholar Adi Shankara interpreted the Upanishads in a non-dual way, which gave rise to the school known as Advaita Vedanta. Whereas, on the other hand, the scholar Madhvacharya interpreted them in a dualistic way and gave rise to Dvaita Vedanta, which is quite different. And we will indeed be exploring many of these thinkers and schools in future videos. Indeed, these sages behind the Upanishads can in some way represent a form or a certain strand of the Shramana movement that adopted the earlier Vedic text as authoritative scriptures, whereas other Shramana movement, indeed religions like Buddhism and Jainism, actually originated as Shramana movements, but they can be seen as Shramana ascetics that did not accept the authority of the Vedas. The Vedas are not sacred scriptures to either the Buddhists or the Jains. So this is a difference between
Even
them.
though, by what I understand, they adopted a lot of concepts from Hinduism. At least Buddha, by what I understand, Buddha grew up a Hindu and then left Hinduism and then started his own sort of philosophical tradition, if I understand that correctly. Even though they don't revere the Vedas, I think there was a heavy influence there by Hinduism.
Who did not accept the authority of the Vedas, which created things like Buddhism and Jainism, but the sages that did accept the authority of the Vedas, it is they who seem to have produced the Upanishads, and which also then led to Hinduism. Thus, through the meeting of the Shramana movement and the core tradition of Brahmana Vedic ritual religion and their consolidation in the literature of the Upanishads, the Vedic religion was fundamentally transformed. Ideas like samsara, karma, and moksha became central concepts that would remain cornerstones of all the traditions, the religious traditions in India that followed. In other words, through this last part of the Vedas and their influence, we are one step closer to something resembling Hinduism today. To put it simply, the Vedas are a massive collection of texts of many different parts and different kinds of texts. And it would take further centuries of an enormous amount of different commentaries and interpretations and schools of thought before we reach something that resembles Hinduism. So let me know in the comments if there's any other specific topic within this larger subject of Hinduism or the Dharmic religions that...
Interesting. I think it looks like it's pretty well wrapped up. And it's 8 o'clock on the dot. I am good. Man, I'm good. Although I'm probably not going to close this live stream out until later. But anyway, that is interesting. All right. I feel like within this hour, I have compacted so much knowledge. Not really. I mean, I feel like I learned a lot. How much of this I will retain? I will retain some of it. I'm pretty good at retaining at least some of my knowledge I learned. But I'm sure I'll have to be reminded at some point about some of these as well. But man, there's a lot of complex history there. A lot of information. And I am continually amazed by how much literature there is in Hinduism. I am always intrigued by I'm intrigued by Hinduism because it's so novel to me. It's so new to me that I'm trying to learn more about it. Extremely interesting, extremely fascinating. A lot of history, a lot of stuff there. But I must head out. It is 8 o'clock and I got to go eat some food because I am hungry. So thank you everyone for listening. Subscribe, comment, like, all that YouTube stuff. But in reality, I'm just grateful y'all watch. I'm thankful for y'all being here. I'm grateful for the community that's been building here. And I'm just extremely thankful for everyone in the live chat. You guys are great. Thank you for being here. Very appreciative. And as always, before I head out, go out there, friends, and light the world yourselves.